This is Average Sports.
By your average guys.
Eric.
And Ty. That would be so bad.
Yeah. This is Average Sports.
Your average sports.
Average Sports.
Thanks for tuning into another episode
You're
of
listening to Average Sports with your average guys.
Average Sports. Average guys. Eric and Ty.
We are about 6 months in, Eric, to 2020, and my goodness, I'm ready to start talking about some sports for real, but this is going to be another episode of, I guess, the quarantine edition. You have it tuned to another Average Sports with your average guys, and I'm Ty, and that's Eric on the line.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's another week in quarantine.
Oh, my goodness.
Here in Missouri/Illinois for us, and most places around the country, except maybe Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri.
Oh,
not care.
Yikes! Yeah, it got wet and wild down in the Ozarks.
Yeah, it did.
Did you ever watch that show, by the way?
I am a couple episodes in. Holly is like all the way through all the active season. I'm trying to catch up on. I just finished Schitt's Creek and starting on Dave, which is also super hilarious.
Okay, we've turned over to competitive baking, in particular the British baking show. I think that's a good one to put on, especially if you need to, fulfill some kind of competition in your life. You want to see some people like do their best at a skill. I mean, it's pretty emotional. People cry a lot.
Thing you've seen baked?
Dude, this one guy made a key lime pie, and the hosts are still talking about it. So you got to check that out. Entertaining,
though. Key lime pie, baby. I spent a lot of time in South Florida.
Yes, you did, and you are never one to let someone not know that you spent a lot of time down there. Yeah, we're where. You're a Miami boy. Typically, we kick off a show with a butthole in sports. We kind of have a twofer here for you. Although, the one I picked is really on the Korean soccer team. If you didn't hear about that club that instead of putting cutouts of people in the stands, they use sex dolls as the replacements. I think also, I go 50-50. I think that's hilarious. I think cool, whatever. It's creative in a way. Whatever you got to do. At the same time, though, they got fined. It was definitely not seen as, it was a bit garish, if you will. So, they were hit with like 50 grand or 35 grand. I don't know, something like that, whatever it amounted to. But probably a heavy fine for the club. And so it's at the same time, you're getting the privilege to play your sport. Don't screw it up.
What I thought was funniest about that is they came out and they said, well, they're not actually sex dolls, but the company we got them for, they produce sex dolls.
But they made, sure. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, that's such a great comment.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Does that argument hold water? Well, I don't know.
It does not. It does not hold water.
Anyway.
Mine is we love making Tom Brady the butthole in sports, and this week he kind of did it to himself with the match for champions or champions charity. Tiger Woods and Peyton Manning faced off against Phil Mickelson and Tom Brady, and Tom Brady had this awesome shot. I don't know what the distance was, but it was definitely somewhere you would just kind of lay up on the green and then put it in, and he knocked it in. It was great, but he went down to pick up his ball and split the pants right down his backside, so he showed his own b-hole.
That's hilarious.
Tom Brady's also our b-hole in sports once again.
Do you think he's eating some key lime pie down while he's in Tampa, or what? He's putting the LBs on? Is he out of shape, we think?
I don't know, man. I mean, maybe they were just tight pants, I guess. I don't know.
Okay. What has been actually happening in the sports universe, Eric? You got a couple of highlights from the last couple of weeks.
There's a couple other things going on. So, we don't spend a lot of time typically talking about NASCAR, but NASCAR did start back up, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
They were doing fanless races, and they started with the first one last week in Darlington. Denny Hamlin won his first race there, and first restarted race there in Darlington. And Charlotte is, happening at the moment while we are recording this. However, they are currently in a rain delay. So we'll see if they actually finish that tonight or if they will finish it over the coming days in Charlotte. So some of those sports are starting to pick back up, fanless, which is great. And then English Premier League Soccer has announced that they will start on June 17th. So that's coming up as well, too. We have an official date for the world's most popular game in soccer. And so we will see how that works out for them.
Yeah, very cool.
And pretty excited about that. So, it seems like we're starting to, just like when we saw those dominoes fall on the one end in early March with the NBA and NHL, and then, MLS here, and then everything else, kind of canceling. I think maybe we're hoping to start to see the dominoes fall the other direction where, 1, 2, 3 of these leagues are starting to be like, okay, hey, we're getting back to maybe not business as usual, but we're at least getting back to competition side. So,
and that's what it'll take. It needs to have a couple of leagues to demonstrate here's what we can do and have others build off of that. It can't just be everyone figuring it out all at once. And every sport does have its own nuances and details that they will have to take care of. And every sport is, of course, played a little differently. Some certainly involve more contact than others. So NASCAR is a great sport to trial without fans because the pit crew is already wearing helmets, so it's easy to stay masked up. The athlete, if you will, the driver, is already encapsulated in a vehicle. They don't necessarily need to be masked up as much. There's social distancing with the other competitors. It's a sport that really can bear well through the kind of restrictions that the pandemic has laid on sports. A couple other things, though, before we talk about a sport that is also looking to come back for us this summer. Wanted to mention, because we're going to talk a lot about hockey, the NHL's website. I saw that Ovechkin had another baby recently. Congrats, just shout out to him. And on there, something that caught my eye that, the Sabres, Buffalo, are going to miss the playoffs for the 9th time in a row. And why we are talking about playoffs is because that, ladies and gentlemen, is the sport that has the plan. The return to play plan. It was recently announced just 2 days ago? I think it was.
It was a couple days. I think it was 2 days ago.
So earlier, like May 26th.
Yeah. House every single day. So days are running together. So Gary Bettman, held an actual press conference from what looked to be like a hallway in his house. It was an interesting choice there. It seemed like, but he ran through the NHL's entire plan on getting back to play or return to play, as well as what they're doing with the NHL draft. Now, while we won't cover that in this episode, what we do want to cover is what's happening and the basics of the NHL returning to play. So there's a couple things. I'm just going to kind of give you a top level view, and then Ty and I can kind of talk about this a little bit. But we're talking about 24 teams are going to be resuming play. The top 12 teams in each conference by points percentage at the pause, which was March 13th, are going to be included into the resume to play. Now, they are concluding for statistical reasons and season overhead reasons the 2019-2020 NHL season completed. So I think that's also important to know. These are going to be considered all playoff games moving forward. Each conference is going to be assigned one hub city where they have secure hotels, arenas, practice facilities, and in-market transportation. Another thing that is super important for us to know is that in early June, clubs are going to be able to return to their home facilities for voluntary small group on and off ice training. So that's starting in June, which is just right around the corner here as we just went through Memorial Day. They have comprehensive testing in place for all of these teams, as well as they're only going to be allowed to bring a couple of team members with them that aren't players, medical staff, trainers, things like that. Yeah. And so some of the hub cities, they haven't decided on this. Right. They do have some hub cities here. I'm going to run quickly through them. Chicago, Columbus, Dallas, Edmonton, Vegas, Los Angeles, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Toronto, and Vancouver are the main teams. Now, as far as getting back to actual play, what they're going to do is they are going to take the top 4 teams in each conference and do a round-robin tournament between those 4 teams so that they actually then have proper seeding when it comes time for what they're actually calling the first round of the playoffs. Then they're having a qualifying round with the remaining 8 teams that are going to be playing a best of 5 between those remaining 8 teams. and which is pretty cool. So they are opening it up as we kind of already talked about, which is pretty exciting. So it's going to be, instead of 8 teams, it's going to be 12. And they did that, knowing that there was a lot of time left in the season, that there could be some movement up and down, and not just taking the top 8. So they've,
which I think is fair.
Yeah. I think it is completely fair, because you definitely see, especially in the NHL and in the NBA, you can see a lot of movement in there between someone that, could be coming up or in and out. And on the last day of the season, every year, you see teams that are fighting on that very last day of the season to get into the playoffs.
And unlike the NBA, you see an 8 seed in the NHL get hot at the end of the season. They barely make it into the playoffs, and they can go really far, if not win the whole thing. We've seen it happen.
Yes,
where so
especially in hockey,
right?
You see that a lot in hockey.
You get that puncher's chance just by getting into the playoffs. So I think it's only fair to get as many teams as possible, and I think this really is a kind of a fair look at the league. You're getting the majority in the playoffs, quote unquote. Did you cover though what happens to the loser teams of the year who didn't make it in?
So the ones that aren't even make it to the qualifying bracket?
Yeah, correct.
They're done.
They're done for the year, but they move into the draft lottery, right?
They will move into the draft lottery. I don't have as much information on that stuff here to kind of go over, but they will move into the draft lottery. The draft lottery is very, very complicated. It is going to require a lot of time to actually dive into. If you guys want to check out what is actually going to happen with that, I actually suggest you guys jump onto the NHL.com website and actually watch the conference for Gary Bettman. Last 7 minutes or so, he talks specifically just about the draft and how it works. There's a lot of contingencies that are in place for that. So it's actually a lot to go over.
Okay.
And then so it's going to all be conference-based playoffs, bracket formula for each round to determine that seeding, and then moving forward. The qualifying round winners will play the top seeds in the first round. First and second round, they haven't decided, but it'll either be a best of 5 or best of 7 as well too. Now the qualifying round is already decided as best of 5. Then the conference finals and the Stanley Cup finals will for sure be a best of 7 series, and they will be played in the hub cities. If it's, for example, let's take last year, Boston and St. Louis. They will not be traveling back and forth between Boston and St. Louis playing those arenas. They will play in one of the hub cities the entire time. They won't even travel from hub city to hub city. It will be played in that whatever hub city they designate, the entire time.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned some of the conditions there and changing the number of games that may be played in each series. Also, some playoff overtime rules will stick around for much of those series. I think the only one that I came across was really when the top 4 teams play. They play a regular season shootout and overtime style.
And
so drop
for the round robin. Yes.
Right. Yeah, just to do that. So the rest of it, though, is going to be a lot of playoff hockey and playing till there's a winner, like a proper winner.
Correct.
So I think that's pretty exciting. We should expect to see a lot of hockey. Now, when I say expect, that all depends, though, on the ability for these host cities to really say, okay, we are allowing the NHL to also come in here. It's not just that you're looking at us and saying, we want to host the rest of the season here. It has to be a two-way street because there's still so many restrictions across the country. And as you mentioned, one of the cities that you named out, or that's on the short list, is Chicago. They've had, as we know, a very tough go at the whole pandemic. Mm-hmm. Do you really want to bring an influx of 10,000 staff and players to that city to host these games when they're a little preoccupied right now just getting the economy back going? So it's a weird one.
Is head scratcher on this one.
Right. So I think some of those cities are kind of naturally going to just not be the case. But that does get us into a who you got for this episode. And that's going to be on the best host cities that the NHL should really go to for the rest of the 2019-2020 season.
Yeah, for me, I look at the host cities or the potential host cities, and we just talked about Chicago being a head scratcher, so I would immediately throw them out. There is one that I question, hey, why aren't they on this list? which would be Orlando, Florida, based on the amount of tourism that they see every year, based on the amount of hotel space that they have. They have the venues to do it. However, the NBA is actually very much looking at Orlando. And so I think that may be why they